Thank you for joining us for our final installment of the Michael Kabotie Lecture Series. We have had really terrific speakers this week. We kicked it off with Miranda Roberts on Tuesday, Deb Kroll yesterday with us, and today we're welcoming James Writing In. James Writing In is a citizen of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma and received an associate's degree from Haskell Indian Junior College, a baccalaureate in history from Fort Lewis College, and a master's in American Indian Studies and a doctorate in U.S. history from UCLA. He is a founding member of the American Indian Studies program at Arizona State University, where he teaches courses dealing with the issues of sovereignty, repatriation, sacred sites, activism, human rights, and colonization, decolonization. Writing In scholarly works may be found in numerous academic journals and books. He's the co-editor of Native Historians Write Back, Decolonizing American Indian History, a past president of the American Indian Studies Association, and a featured writer for the National Museum of American Indian Writer Series. Writing In has been the editor of Wikazo's Review, a journal of Native American Studies since 2004, and is the founding chair of the Pawnee Nation College Board of Trustees. He is now examining Pawnee cultural survival under U.S. rule. So it is my honor to introduce James Writing In. I'm really glad that he's here. I also wanted to bring up Chef Freddie to just share a few words about the yummy food that he brought for all of us to enjoy, and also to recognize and thank our sponsors for this important programming. Freddie?
Oh, thank you so much. Really quick, I'm just going to be like about 2-3 minutes here. What you're having today is a wild rice salad, which is pretty much a staple when you open any kind of modern Native American cookbook. And so I thought I'd share that. And plus, when I was at the Whole Foods, I found out that they actually had real wild rice. They didn't have the patty rice. And then on top of that, what I really loved about shopping in the desert over the week is I saw golden beets. And I live in Phoenix and in New Mexico, and I cannot find golden beets anywhere. But beets were brought in, they're not indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, but they were brought in by Europeans. And a lot of the the tribes in the Pacific Northwest embraced it as part of their food, part of their diet, just like how my tribe, the Navajo tribe, made a ewe product like sheep, lamb, part of our daily staple. And it became, a Native American ingredient. And it's looked down upon because it's kind of like a peasant food. But every time I talk about peasant food is the fact that ossobuco, many, many years ago, used to be peasant food. Now you can't buy it for less than $40 at an Italian restaurant in New York. So it's really important to understand how food evolves. And that's, again, when I talk about these ingredients in my book, we're progressing as a culture. We're progressing as a culinary culture, and that's what's the most important thing. So, again, thank you to Idyllwild Arts for having me, and I love being here. And trust me, being in front of the speaker just makes me so inferior. So enjoy, and I'm looking forward to the lecture.
I hated to follow that act, too. Yeah, no act. I'm James Writing In, and let me give you a little background about my interest in American Indian Studies. Growing up, I was raised in Indian country in Oklahoma, on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana, and on the Navajo Reservation in Crown Point, New Mexico. So through those experiences and my dad's background as an educator, I became very interested in these concerns, especially, watching the way that Indians were depicted on TV and in schools, the movies, and how terrible it was. And, that wasn't the reality we know of our relatives, being backward savages and fierce opponents to the expansion of this society that claims to be the best in the world today. And that's questionable, but we're not going to get into that. So I think it was kind of natural for me just to gravitate towards American Indian Studies. After I got out of high school, I took my senior tour to Vietnam in '69, and coming back, the takeover of Alcatraz Island was going on when I came through San Francisco Bay, San Francisco Harbor. And that was really an eye-opening experience for me, how much the Indian world was changing, how activism was coming into play, challenging all these years of colonization and the violation of our human rights. So after I got out of the service in '72, I went to Haskell Indian Junior College, hoping that I could get a good curriculum about the study of American Indians. And it really didn't work out because, it was just forming in those years. This individual by the name Donna Shopanek, Wendy and I know him, and he was a great guy. He was a biology professor, a PhD, and he was the one that was pushing to get American Indian studies going there. Haskell's got a very good program now. I evaluated it a couple of years ago. But it took a while to get there. Then I went to Fort Lewis College, brought home a wife from there who we just celebrated our 40-something-ish anniversary last night. And yeah, so she's been the foundation of my activism, my work, my academic career, supporting me as I went through college as well. So, I owe the world to her. At Fort Lewis, there wasn't much either. They were just forming programs, and I'd take courses in U.S. history, and Indians were presented as a savage, the other. Even courses by these people who were supposed to be experts in Indian history. They were teaching that manifest destiny history, that Indians were inferior, that federal policy was the best thing that could happen to Indian people, that Indians need to be assimilated. And even when they didn't overtly say those things, it was said in covert ways, some of that coded language. So this is what I went through as I was developing as a scholar and someone who's very interested in American Indian studies. So, sovereignty is critical to what American Indian studies is. I'm going to go over this fairly quickly, sovereignty, but, that's what our future as Indigenous peoples is based upon. Actually, I don't like the term Indigenous too much because, we don't go to, we at ASU, we haven't called ourselves Indigenous Studies because that opens up a whole new set of issues. And, there are so many concerns still facing Indian country with those federally recognized and non-federally recognized Indian peoples here that we need to have programs that focus exclusively on them. But look at the parallels that exist with others. And I'll get to that when I talk about the paradigm that I developed while I was at ASU. I'm retired now. That bio that was read is a little old. So yeah, sovereignty is critical. That's the power for our people to self-govern. It existed before colonial times, and it still existed today. But the United States government has suppressed it, along with many of our human rights. So here's some of those pre-colonial powers. I'm not going to go over those. I'm going to have to rush to get through this project. And these are some of the ways that U.S. has impaired sovereignty. Initially, the United States and the colonial governments mostly treated Indian peoples as foreign nations. And, the United States went from treating Indian nations as foreign nations to wards of the government around the beginning of the 20th century. My father was born a ward of the government. He remained a ward of the government for much of his years, and I'm sure that some of our native peoples in here, that's the same way as well. So treaties, that's one way that our sovereignty was recognized by the federal government for various reasons. And, the Constitution does not strip any Indians of sovereign powers. All the Constitution says, well, the most important thing is that Congress can regulate trade or commerce. That's it, commerce. Very small, narrow area. But then treaties came into play that began to restrict our sovereignty somewhat, saying that the United States was our protectorate. That's kind of like putting a chicken coop under Colonel Sanders' care, isn't it? And Congress, first treated Indians on a nation-to-nation basis, but then based upon Supreme Court decisions, it began to impose laws on Indians that took away our jurisdiction, that restricted our human rights, that limited our sovereignty. And the Supreme Court took the lead in this process of developing this intellectual framework for doing that by incorporating such extra-constitutional discourses into federal Indian law as a doctrine of discovery, domestic dependent nations, awards of the government, and then saying that Congress has plenary power over Indians and that the federal government has a trust relationship that it has to uphold. It basically means to protect Indian interests, but that trust relationship has been a double-edged sword. Sometimes the United States government has used it to benefit Indians, and other times it's been used against it. And the Supreme Court, in making those decisions, like the doctrine of discovery, how could they justify that when it's not in the Constitution? Well, by calling Indians savages. If you read John Marshall's decisions in the Marshall Trilogy, the word savage is frequently used. So there was a language of racism, of white superiority and Indian inferiority that was used to help rationalize the taking of our land and our political subjugation under U.S. domination. And domestic dependent nations, that means we're not foreign, but we're in a state of pupillage and in a relationship that resembles a guardian with his ward. So what's a ward in U.S. law? An incompetent person, a child. So this is how the federal government began treating Indian people as the 20th century progressed and as Indian nations lost their power to resist U.S. domination. But then the boarding schools, U.S. policy. My father, probably some of your parents in here, were taken from their homes when they didn't speak English, placed in these boarding schools where the plan was to strip the Indianness out of them by force or whatever means necessary. So my father was taken from his great-grandmother when he was 8 years old and placed in the Pawnee Indian school, which was close to Pawnee. But a lot of the Indian children were taken to places like Carlisle, and some of ages of 3 or 4 years old from their parents and placed there where they're supposed to remain and develop the arts of civilizations, learn to speak Indian, to speak English, no longer speak Indian, to learn the manifest destiny version of history, and then to learn professions that would enable Indians to serve as basically low-class servants of white society, but all done in the name of progress. Our culture was placed under attack by the Indian Civilization Acts codes that were put in place in the 1880s that continued till 1936. And these codes outlawed healing ceremonies, dances, and even family structure. People could go to jail for violating these codes, and they did. And then termination, that was ending the federal trust relationship with Indians, moving Indians to cities. And I think that's one of the reasons that the non-Indian population in California comes from other places as opposed to here. A lot of it's because of this assimilation, relocation program that was put in place. And then the federal government began to change. Self-determination, recognition of sovereignty again. PL 93-638, I got the wrong number on that. The Indian Self-Determination and Education Act, NAGPRA, language revitalization, sovereignty, religious freedom, child welfare. So, things have improved. Our governments are functioning well. Gaming has been a big part of our economic recovery. But we're still under U.S. domination. We're still considered domestic dependent nations. And then there's also the involuntary sterilization of women, the court cases that continue to deny us protections of our sacred places. Then UNDRIP came about to try to protect indigenous peoples around the world from this type of domination. So, the academic thinking and popular culture thinking, was based on the notion of white supremacy when it came to Indians. And as I mentioned, this language was used by judges, by lawmakers, by newspaper accounts, as we heard yesterday. It was common thinking. And, history, the writing of history, it was flawed with methodological problems. Just looking at non-Indian documentation about Indians, that often use the word savages and presented Indians as backward, flawed peoples. And So it was very problematic. Anthropology, presented Indians as static, dying cultures. Archaeology was in the meantime going out looting our graves and shipping the remains of our ancestors along with their funerary objects to distant museums for study in perpetuity. Museums were complicit in this as they were repositories, and they were also involved in the taking of sacred objects and human remains from our people. Then the educational system continued to present Indians as savages, the S word. One of the inspirations that I've had over the years has been Elizabeth Cookland, a Dakota from Crow Creek Reservation in South Dakota. And she is one of the most potent thinkers about what American Indian Studies is and what it should be. During the 1960s, early 1970s, a few universities began to bring on Indians, and they were looking for the super Indians, those who could do everything, those who could teach all the classes, those who could do all the recruitment, those who could do all the administration, those who could do all the counseling. And what are you doing with that? Setting people up for failure. So these programs, although, these indigenous or Indian people's leaders, they wanted programs that would be vested in the future interests of Indian people, as opposed to making, history or anthropology accessible to those who exploited our culture, who benefited through their career development without giving anything back. So universities, as Elizabeth Cookland said, never took it serious by administrators or professors. And there was no development of American Indian Studies as an academic discipline. So that's what some of us began to do, when we got our degrees and came into the academia. We were kind of not shocked by it, but, because we'd gone through this process of education and seen how inferior it was, and how, even good intended people were using some of these flawed concepts to present Indians. So, we wanted to strengthen American Indian Studies, to establish these standalone programs, to establish American Indian Studies as an academic discipline. So that's what we did at Arizona State University. We formed an association, the American Indian Studies Association, that was dedicated to that principle. We had a professoriate organization that was also devoted to that. So we had a lot of support from our indigenous peoples, our Indian peoples, to move forward and develop these. So, we started, when I left UCLA, I took a position in justice studies at Arizona State University, and with the understanding that we could develop Indian studies. So we developed a certificate program, and we were able to hire 3 faculty to teach these classes. But the problem is that when we wanted to make a hire and thought that someone was good, our non-Indian colleagues wanted somebody else. So because of those clashes, we decided to create our own program. And we got our dean's support and do that. So, and in my presentations, I like to incorporate artwork into this, into what I'm saying. This is a photograph of my great-grandfather, who was a doctor. We call them doctors, not medicine in our Pawnee ways. And he was a bear doctor, so, that's why I put this carving next to him, because it reminds me of his powers, Our powers of our medicine men came from animals, basically. So American Indian Studies, this paradigm is grounded in experiences of American Indian nations, peoples, communities, organizations from American Indian perspectives, which is very important because, when you go to the library, there's books and books and journal articles on top of one another about Indians, and they're mostly written from these, the canons of these colonizing disciplines, and they're problematic in a lot of different ways. So we think it's important that we make our perspectives an important part of intellectual discourse. So, our principles are rooted in the concept of sovereignty and indigeneity. And so, reflection of sovereignty is our police. This is Pawnee-centric, by the way, the rest of this presentation. We're rebuilding after our subjugation and near eradication. My Pawnee people once said we were as populous as a buffalo in the stars, but by the turn of the century, there was a little over 500 of us left. So what happened to us? And that's a part of this, what we need to know. It wasn't, anthropologists and others used to say Indians would kill one another off so they could never develop large populations. Nonsense. Well, anyways, police, tribal courts, we're rebuilding, but we're rebuilding differently. We change with times. Cultures have to change or they're going to vanish. Then it recognizes disparate worldviews, literatures, and knowledge systems, political structures, and language characterize modern Indian societies within the United States, but that we share commonalities that link us with other indigenous peoples, and that indigenous should be capitalized there. I apologize for that, of the world. So, what we're doing, there's, to try to restore our language. Like I said, my father and his generations, the federal people hired to run those boarding schools use corporal punishment to force compliance with these vast number of rules that were designed to make our parents and their parents more receptible to assimilation. So, we're recovering our language. We had a delegation that just went up to Indiana University last week. I would have gone, but I had an issue that kept me from going. But we were recovering boxes and boxes of our language materials that were taken by this linguist who came and said he would help us recover our language to keep it going. And he got there and he held our language hostage. He wouldn't provide us anything. And he died this past year. And now the university is doing everything in its power to make up for what he did. So we just got one of these little jump drives of over 1,000 of our songs recorded on to get back, and boxes of our language. So many of you understand this terrible history. Yes, and they said they're doing to restore our language, but if you look at what happened, the language speakers continue to decline. So, these people who are working on behalf of our language, we're not doing a good job of it. They were promoting their own selves primarily. But they did help record our language, and some of them are good. I don't want to cast a shadow over everyone, but we Pawnees have had some very bad experiences. And the UNDRIP, Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we're hoping it would be a gushing of human rights, but it hasn't panned out yet. It requires prior informed consent for any activities that are going to affect our people, which is something new. So it has some good guiding principles in there that could help these colonizing nations improve policies dealing with Indian peoples. But still, those that are colonizers, they're afraid that they're going to lose their rights and authority over us, which is not such a bad thing in my perspective. But in theirs, it's the worst thing that could happen. It impacts how colonial has impacted our sovereignty, human rights, land holdings, religious freedom, health, welfare, and cultural integrity. There's a meeting with Pawnees with the Long expedition in 1819 in Council Bluff, right along the Missouri River, and that's government-to-government relations. And it has changed, as I mentioned in my presentation, to one of domination and considering to be domestic dependent nations. Then this marker at Genoa Indian School in Nebraska mentions the many different Indian nations that send their children there for assimilation. I actually didn't send them there, but we're taking there mostly. And now I'm on the, we have a board for the, it's called the Genoa Indian School Reconciliation Project, and I'm on the co-director of that board. And we found out that there was a cemetery there that had over 100 graves in it, and it can't be located. So that's a big search now, because that's important, because in Canada recently, burials have been discovered totaling, 1,000 or more students that weren't known about. So, this boarding school history was traumatic. Honest, many of us suffer traumatic from the trauma, because it's passed on generationally. And a lot of times the problems in our communities stem from this history, not from deficiencies in our culture and our people, but because of the harm that has come to us over years through these policies. So AIS focuses on the protection and strengthening of sovereignty, self-determination, self-sufficiency, and human rights. And nowhere else in academia will you see a program like this. So this is why our programs are so important, and I think this is this is a reason why it's important that our young people, our young college students, take these courses and learn this history, learn this true history. Don't get it through history or sociology. I mean, you'll get an understanding of it like I did when you go through, but you got to think critically and challenge these people. You know, when I was a student at Fort Lewis, I took a class called The American West through Literature and Film, looking at depictions of Indians through novels. That was a part of it. And, you know, these were just the savages, grunting savages as being presented. And then when I challenged the professors, the way that they presented these materials and these films that we're watching, and the books did, they would say, well, how did you know you weren't there? You know, stuff like that, to try to keep these ideas of manifest destiny history functional. And that deprives us of our rights. You know, so we must view our teaching, research, and service as a sacred responsibility to the survival of our nations. Important. Again, no one else does this. This is my partner in crime, Manny Pino from Acoma Pueblo, and we've been working together in many different areas, environmental justice, racial justice, sacred sites protection, water rights protection over the years. And we both retired. He was at Scottsdale Community College for a number of years. And we retired last May, and we committed the rest of our lives to activism. So we don't have to grade any more student papers. Well-written student papers, I should say. But it was mentioned yesterday by that great presentation, you know, one of the things important if you're going to become a journalist is learn to write. Writing is going to take you further than anything else, your ability to articulate yourself in the colonizer's language, and hopefully we can learn to do it in our own languages as well. So I had to put the picture of my bro in there. So, you know, we provide a curriculum for the intellectual, ethical, and social development of students so that they'll acquire a comprehensive and practical understanding of U.S. law and policy, colonization, decolonization, and nation building. Again, you know, this is unique to American Indian Studies. So, you know, if you're traveling east on Highway Route 64, this is about 10, 12 miles outside of Pawnee, you're in what used to be our reservation. You know, our reservation was broken up by the Dawes Act, and now, you know, our communal land holdings are only about 600 acres. But we still own a lot of land in trust, you know, land that was allotted to our ancestors. But the problem is sometimes there's several hundred of us heirs on a small section of land. So, you know, that's issues we're going to have to work through as well. So, you know, a lot of this recovery is up to ourselves, you know, as Indigenous thinkers and scholars and activists. And even if you enter politics, you know, strive to promote the sovereignty and well-being of our nations, and just don't be a token colonized Indian. You know, so we privilege oral history and traditional knowledge while promoting collaborative, community-based research methods that transcend disciplinary boundaries. So, you know, we take whatever works. You know, even the dreaded concept of critical race theory. I love it. I teach it. I taught it for years, you know, because how else can you understand how the Supreme Court uses this language? You know, is it because of the goodness of their heart they called us savages? Or is it because of racist ideas and thinking that permeated society, which was the case? So, you know, we have to challenge those mindsets. We have to make them aware. These cases, they're still being used as precedent today to make decisions about our sovereignty, about our land. So when these cases are based upon colonial discourses, do we have a chance in court to win? It minimizes our chances to win. You know, we can win some cases, but when we do, we're still under that model of U.S. domination of domestic dependent nations. So it's important, you know, that we understand this history. We decolonize this thinking. We decolonize our minds so our butts will follow, you know. So we can be more than just talkers about it. We can be activists. And it calls for partnerships with Indian nations, communities, and organizations that seek tangible and sensible solutions rooted in indigenous and non-indigenous knowledge to address problems facing American Indian nations. And I was engaged in repatriation work for many years. And, you know, a lot of horror stories involved in the theft of our remains. And one of them I worked with was, you know, Pawnees, because we were at war with the Sioux, Dakota, mostly Cheyennes and Arapahoes, you know, and the United States expansion coming in. We were trapped between a rock and a hard place. So, you know, many of our people, with the express wishes, or as approved by our leaders, you know, Pawnee leaders, we became allies of the United States government in these wars. So one of the situations I researched was the killing and decapitation of some of these individuals who had been recently discharged from the Army by the U.S. Army in a place called Mulberry Creek, Kansas. So these remains were at the Smithsonian and then the National Museum of Health and Medicine at Walter Reed Hospital. So, you know, this was a part of our work. That's a part of our healing, is to get our ancestors back and to put them into Mother Earth where they belong. It's hard work doing this, very frustrating, but, you know, we make accomplishments. One time, one of my good friends let us know that the Heard Museum was planning an exhibit that was featuring pre-Columbian, as they were called, bracelets and necklaces. Where do you get pre-Columbian matching necklaces and bracelets? From graves, earrings. Only place you can get them. So on the eve of that, well, before it opened, was able to get a delegation of Autumn women and Adrian Hendricks and a few others, and we went to the Heard and met with the director, and we told him, you know, you got to shut this down, or we're going to create a lot of problems for you. So they did. So on the eve of that exhibit opening up, you know, we were able to shut it down. So we can, through activism, make change. And it takes sometimes inside moles to make us aware of what's going on so we can take these actions. And I thank that person deeply for, you know, for doing this on behalf of Indian people, and even at the risk of, you know, repercussions. Okay, it acknowledges Indian concepts of living in a balanced, harmonious, and reciprocal relationship with our Earth Mother. I have place and dialogue concerning sustainable communities, climatic change, environmental degradation, and justice. So, you know, as I say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, and we're in the beast, the belly of the beast here in the United States, as a lot of our activist brothers and sisters say when they go out into these international meetings of indigenous peoples and carry on dialogue. But, you know, we do have a little better off, in many respects, a lot better off than a lot of the indigenous peoples around the world. So again, you know, the symbols, you know, of Mother Corn here. Up there, the picture on the left is the old Fort Lewis property, which, you know, we've been struggling over to protect for years. And then it trains future leaders and intellectuals to meet challenges of an ever-changing world. So we have to be prepared. Oops, am I gabbing on too long again? I took this picture. It was a UN rapporteur at Arizona, that other university in university, the one down south. I forget the name of it. You know, when the ones we say fork the kiddies when they come to town. U of A. So, yeah, you know, the worst thing you can give an Indian is a mic, by the way. Okay, any questions or comments? Well, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I thought I was going to do that at the onset, and you know, and acknowledge that we're in Cahuilla country. You know, I became acquainted with the Kuya bird singers when I was at UCLA, and I just love their songs, their dance, and, you know, working with them in some respects, yeah, so.
So one quick interesting thing, when the Native Arts program was created, there was a really big focus on archaeology in the beginning, and the spirit of the Native American Art Festival Week and that conception was to break beyond that mold. And the namesake of this lecture series, Michael Kabotie, was, you know, at the helm with a few others here at Idyllwild Arts to, you know, bring in voices like James, like Miranda, like Deb Kroll. So, you know, there's a big shout out and thanks to them, because the spirit of their work is continuing, and a part of those solutions are just simply having these conversations that now we're privy to, you know, a different side of the story. So thank you very much. And a reminder, this evening we have the film showcase at Rustic Theater in town. We have the whole theater to ourselves, so entry is free, and join us at 6 p.m. for 2 films. So thank you very much.